Hello. Welcome to episode number one, two, three, four, five, six, seven. DJ, drop the beat. Welcome. If you're joining me for the first time, my name is Armel Tekam. Welcome to my channel. Go ahead and leave me a comment, like, share, and subscribe. I really like to, engage with my listeners. Let me know what you think, what you like, what you want to see, what you don't want to see, and all that fun stuff. Today, we are having a conversation with Mr. Erik Zavodsky. That's how you pronounce his name. This guy is obviously you can see he's a front end developer with interest in no code tools, UI UX design. But the reason I got interested in this guy, guys, listen to this. This young man decided to collect 18,000 data points on himself. You know why he did that? You want to know? You want to know? You want to know? Let me tell you why. Because this guy's trying to figure out how he sleeps, and what he does with his time. Who decides to do something like that? Now, to be fair, he said he saw a thread on Reddit, I believe, where a whole bunch of people were trying to do this stuff. I'd never heard of anything like that before. Who sits down and decides to collect 18,000 data points to figure out their patterns, how they spend their time, how they sleep, and all that fun stuff? But I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was really brilliant. I thought that how do you know? You can only remember so much. I can't really remember what I did, I don't know, 2 weeks ago. But with this, you can basically collect data on yourself over a period of time and then paint a clear picture of what you actually of how you actually operate. So I thought that was interesting. And he has a video subscription business that he does for corporate and even private individuals where they basically help create, training videos and whatnot for your enterprise. I thought it was a very interesting young man. He has a some very interesting ideas, and he's self-taught, so he didn't go to the university to learn how to code or design or anything like that. He just kind of figured it out on his own over time while he was working as an analyst, while he was, went back to his old school where he graduated from. That's another thing that I thought was very interesting. So just like me, he basically went to a new school because I graduated from Katuk in 2015. I went to Katuk in 2011, but Katuk was created in 2010. I mean, it started operating in 2010. So it was a relatively new institution. So he graduated from his. A year later, he came back to work for the school he graduated from. Thought that was very interesting. It's a bit like me, a couple of years later, going back to work for Katuk. So thought that was interesting. But let me know what you think. I thought this was a very interesting conversation. The guy is doing something very useful that I think he's trying to add value to the world. So let me know what you think in the comments. Go ahead and like, share, subscribe. I really just enjoy having interesting conversations. Part of the reason I decided to do this is because one, I feel as though the world, the landscape of media and business is changing to where basically things what people like Mr. Beast and like I want to say somebody like Joe Rogan are doing is the future of media. And if you want to be like truly successful in business, like over the next decade, what I see is a trend where you want to have like, be able to share your own ideas, have a platform, want to move away from snippets, tidbits. It doesn't matter the subject matter. It could be tech, it could be business, it could be politics, religion, you name it. The landscape is changing. So this is part of my way of adapting to that. And I also really love a good conversation. I basically want to explore the minds of people I find interesting. And I enjoy learning new stuff. I like talking to people that are considered smarter than me. And yeah, that's really the intent here, and we will once once we have everything recorded and ready, we'll start publishing probably this is May, right? So let's say sometime next month. It's going to be on all platforms, by the way. Is there a specific platform from which you consume your content? Do you do like podcasts? Do you read books, audiobooks? What do you do?
I consume content on all kinds of platforms. I don't have a specific one really.
Okay, okay. Oh, sounds good. So why don't you go ahead? Maybe I should mention that I'm an author and I cover so topics that I like to talk about, right? Not just science and tech. I cover a little bit of everything, but what I genuinely really go for, I really just like to explore people's minds because in my view, the mind of humans is basically the sandbox of the world. That's where everything starts. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be you cooking a meal or you trying to go to Mars. It all starts in somebody's mind. And that's part of the reason I like to talk to you because I really think I think you're doing something really interesting. I just want to dig into it a little bit. So why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself and let the people know who you are?
Yeah, thank you, man. Oh, so where do we start? I mean, my career in the past couple of years have been very, I guess, non-linear in a sense that I've spent my time in a bunch of different industries, and none of which have really anything to do with one another.
Right.
So I finished high school, was it 2020 probably, which might sound like, okay, that was not that long ago. What could have happened in 4 years?
Right.
But here in Central European countries, you finish high school a little later than in the US. So I was
Oh,
20.
really?
Yeah, I was 20 when I finished high school. Most people are 19, but I had like a transfer year, and so I'm 24 now. And after that, well, my plan was to go to college, but then I took a gap year to, I suppose, just make my applications better, work on it a little more. Then I applied to, I think, maybe around 20 US schools, got rejected from every single one of them,
Oh no.
despite having what I thought were pretty decent stats. But things were competitive. We were in the middle of COVID, and the competition was insane. Or maybe I just wasn't good enough. I don't know. But at this point, at this point, probably doesn't matter too much. So, yeah, for some reason that did not bother me all that much, because you
Okay.
would think, you get 20 rejections
Yeah.
one after
You're like,
another.
oh man,
You,
I'm
you,
depressed. I suck.
yeah, yeah. You think that would bring you down a little bit, and I think for some time I wasn't in a great mood, but also it wasn't a defining moment in any way. And so anyway, I got accepted as an investment banking analyst at one company.
Okay.
So I spent a year there. Then I went to work back for the high school where I graduated from. So I spent 2 years there. And I worked on all kinds of things from being a part of the medical team and helping resolve health issues with students all the way to data analysis. And
Wow.
um, and while I was doing that, I was spending my weekends and evenings learning how to code. So, well, then after a couple of years, I started submitting my applications. I think it took around 50 or 60 rejections to actually land a job as a full-time developer. So that
Wow.
happened. That happened last year. Then I spent a half a year at a company. I quit because of a bunch of different reasons. I also actually applied to college and enrolled in September of last year, but then I dropped out after a couple of months. So, so here I'm back in my home country and enjoying life, and I still work as a developer, but in a different company. So the trajectory has been quite strange. I think
So
it's not
so
not
you're
a
a
typical.
self-taught developer. So you taught yourself how to code basically with what Udemy videos, YouTube. How'd you do that?
Anything I could get my hands on. I mean, in the beginning, you don't really know how you how you should start to learn. So you just search for, how to learn how to code. Or maybe if you have a
Right.
specific language in mind, you search for how do I learn Python. And that is going to throw all kinds of resources your way,
True.
articles, videos, courses. So I did a mix of those, and eventually I just found the kind of learning style that I like and follow that through. and eventually you kind of transition from following other people's instructions on how to do X, Y, and Z, and you start to
Creating your own way, like
yeah,
your
yeah, yeah,
own
yeah,
code. Yeah.
exactly. You start working on your own projects, solving your own problems. They may be insignificant in the grand scheme of things. They may be small. They may not be particularly challenging, um, but it helps you learn, and it's something that you create, and that just increases the chance that you're actually gonna be invested in solving that problem. Because if you're following a tutorial and someone else is, I don't know, creating a calculator, it's not very, it's not very fun. Because like who needs to create a calculator? It's not that
Right.
there's nothing
But
in
that's
there
like a
that
step to figure out how you could do something like that, and then figure out you could do something else that may be similar or better.
yeah, 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 exactly. Sorry, that was a long-winded way to introduce myself.
Okay. So that no, that's good. That's good. That at least gives everybody an idea of who you are and how you got into, your basically your origin story, right? So, left high school, kind of got rejected from US school, and then, ended up working for the school that you graduated from. And do you think you ended up working for the school because that was the only option you had, or you really thought that that was something interesting to do? How do you land on that? Was it just like, okay, this is the only, I mean, they gave me a shot, so I'm gonna take it, or what was that like?
No, that's a good question because I think if someone just listened to what I said, right, I worked as a full-time investment banking analyst, and then I accepted a job at the high school that I graduated from. And typically, that's not the way that career
Yeah,
paths usually go for people. It doesn't make sense because
doesn't make sense.
presumably you have a good career, you're making a decent amount of money, you go back to work for a high school, all those career prospects just don't seem to be as good as in the previous job. So in my case, part of the reason was that even though I had great colleagues in that investment bank, uh, I just didn't feel like I was working on something that I enjoyed. I
Really?
accepted that. Yeah, I mean, I accepted that job partly because I didn't have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
So I was looking for a job in the middle of COVID. You know, not many companies were hiring. There are
Mm-hmm.
many people on the labor market, so the competition was really intense. And I got an offer from them, and it was the only company that I got an offer from. So I accepted it, which is not to say that I accepted it just because of that. I mean, it was genuinely a good company.
But you
So
applied for the job, so yeah, you got the job,
yeah, yeah,
essentially. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So despite the fact that my colleagues were respectful of the fact that I was basically the youngest person there by a long shot, I
Right.
didn't know nowhere nearly as much as them, because all of them had at least a bachelor degree in finance or similar.
Wow. And
So
and
they,
and
so yeah, yeah, and so all of that was nice, but I just didn't feel like I was working on something that I
that
could
was
imagine
meaningful to you.
working on in the next 5 years. And then, I had very good relationships with people at the high school that I graduated from. One of them approached me and said, "Hey, we're looking for a person to fill this job position. We think you could be a great fit. What do you think?" And I was like, let's try and see.
So was that a pay raise for you, or was that a pay cut?
I'm sorry,
Moving from your banking analyst job to this high school job, did you end up making more money or making less?
less.
Less money. That's what I thought. So okay. So you took a pay cut. And what was it about a banking job? Was when you say you're a banking analyst? Because I mean I've worked as an SAP analyst myself. Usually you're the foot soldier, right? You basically do what needs to be done for things to,
Exactly. Yeah.
and that's kind of what it was, Excel work maybe,
Yeah, Excel,
I
PowerPoint, the research. Yeah, exactly as you said. I mean, whatever gets thrown your way. Which is not to say that I felt like I was doing something meaningless. It was meaningful for the company, that's for sure.
right.
But I just didn't feel like it was that meaningful for me personally.
Okay, okay. That makes sense. Okay, now let's go back to, so what exactly did you, when you say you work for your high school, what did you do there? Was it just kind of sort of analyst work? Were you in operations? What exactly did you do?
So I'm thinking of where to start here because this needs a lot of context. So the high school that I studied at, in it was a high school that opened the same year that I enrolled in that high school. So it was a bit of an
Wow, so you're
experiment.
the first batch of the
Yeah,
school.
yeah, yeah. Basically, one of the first 40 students. So it was kind
Wow.
of an experiment. It was the first international boarding high school in my country.
So what
So
country are you from, by the way? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Slovakia.
Okay. Okay. So they opened up. It's funny because it's kind of similar to my story. So the university I went to, I was the second. So it was the second year. It had just been created in 20, I think it was in 2010, and I went in 2011. So kind of understand what I experienced is you're going to a brand new school. Things are not really all that fine tuned. You still there's a lot of figuring out going on with this type of institutions. But yeah, go ahead, carry on. So you were the first, you're the first one of the first 40 students to be enrolled in the school.
Yeah, yeah. And so they had, I suppose you could say they had different ways of doing things in regard to basically anything, in regard to how they taught and what classes they taught and the dynamics between teachers and students. And so when I went to work for that high school, the first position that I took on was called the head of hall. So basically in the student dormitory, it was not quite a campus, um, but that was still being built. Yeah, so we had a student dormitory, and you had students living in different halls. So maybe you had 100 students in a school, and each hall would have 20 students. Four of them live in one room, and there's maybe six rooms per hall. Um,
Okay.
and and so every one of these halls had a faculty member that also lived on that same hall, which I think is probably pretty common in uh,
Europe.
these kinds of boarding schools abroad. So that was the first position that I took up, and I don't
So were
say I
you
super.
living, were you like a faculty member living in one of the halls too, or did you live off campus?
Yeah, the first part exactly right. I was a faculty member living in the hall with those students.
Real students. Okay. Okay, that makes sense. And what did your job, what is the job, what was the job description for that position anyway? What did they need you to do?
Sort of anything that needed to be done. Students often had conflicts, especially when the new year starts and they get paired with someone that they've obviously never met before. Sometimes that works out great, and we had
When you say
some
paired for
algorithm.
projects or paired for, how do you mean paired? Paired in rooms or in for studies for a specific project? What do you mean?
In rooms, like who their roommates were for the rest of
Oh,
the year.
okay.
And then we had some algorithms to make sure that we maximize the chance of them getting along well, but that you can't always make that work 100%. And so sometimes there's conflicts, they don't get along, and sometimes it reaches a point where they cannot resolve it amongst themselves. And so, for example, I would step in and I would help facilitate a discussion between them and try to find some compromise, some middle ground, or some solution. Right? Also, on a weekly basis, we had these meetings. Well, I call them a meeting, but we basically gathered, like the entire hall gathered on a Sunday, and we went over a bunch of logistics. What state the kitchen is in, so very kind of
Well,
trivial things. But also we did some activities to kind of get to know each other a little more and talk about some things that just needed to be resolved in the context of that residence, because there's rules to follow, there's things to do, to not do. At the same time, you don't want to make it like a prison, like here are the rules, follow them. You got to make it a little more fun. So
did they
yeah,
have a curfew? Was there a certain hour at which you had to be back home or you could come in at whatever?
they had to be banged by 10 p.m. On weekdays and 10:30 on weekends.
Okay. So when you went to the high school, did you also stay in one of those halls?
Yeah, yeah, I live like right next to them.
Oh, okay. So that's interesting. So you've been there, done that. You know exactly what they're dealing with, and now you're gonna help manage the
Yeah,
whole.
and it was a bit strange because you imagine when I was in my senior year, then okay, let me put it differently. When I started working there, some of the people that were students when I was a student were now still students. They might have been in their junior or senior year, but I was now a faculty member.
Um,
So it was a sometimes it was a
it was
strange dynamic because
awkward.
now you can't really do the kinds of things you would do as friends, and you have to be a little more reserved because you have to think, okay, I might be fired, if I did this or that. But it was fun because it also helped facilitate those relationships better. Because obviously, like I was just a couple of years older than them on average, and so
Yeah.
I was not like a 50-year-old dinosaur who doesn't know what the internet
It was
is,
not-
and so I spoke their language. I spent 4 years at that school in the exact
yeah,
same position that they were in, so I understood like
it was hard.
them, very very well.
I think I see why they reached out to you. I think I see why they approached you. You were just the perfect candidate. And very noble of you of accepting to go back and work there. So when you went back, you worked there for what, 2 years, I think? Said
Yeah.
2 years, and then okay. And so in between your banking work and working at your high school, that's when you were doing the code thing on the side. You were figuring out how to code at the same
Yeah, 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 exactly. At some point in the sort of halfway through my job in that investment bank, I started to learn how to code. It was not because I wanted to get a job as a developer at some point. I
just
mean,
like
I knew they paid well. The reason I started is, and this is, well, this might be another tangent, but while I was working that job, I I would be collecting or writing down like different data points about myself on a daily basis into an Excel sheet. Like I would track how I spent every half hour of my day and like 30 other data points. What was my mood? How anxious did I feel? How stressed did I feel? Like how, X, Y, and Z. What food I ate. So I had like by the end of, I think this was 2021, I had around 18,000 like handwritten data points in Excel
wow.
about basically, the
So,
past
so I was
year.
I was trying to save this for later, but okay. Let's segue into that. How did you even make the decision that you wanted to collect data points, and what's the nature of what's the nature of the data you're collecting yourself? Did you decide that you wanted to get like personality type data, biometric data, or what was the intention? What was the idea? Why did you decide to collect data on yourself? Because nobody just does that. I don't know anybody that has ever done that. I've never done it. So why did you decide to collect data on yourself?
It's a good question. I think I was inspired by a post that I saw on Reddit. So someone did the exact same thing, and so they collected data for maybe a year, and then they created these like very nice charts out of it, saying, I had an average of I don't know how many hours of sleep in this month, and it correlated with this metric, and just a bunch of different charts and statistics that gave that person a much more, I guess, a much more grounded overview of their life, grounded in reality, I suppose. Because when you look back at what you did in the past year, it's kind of hard. I mean, sometimes I struggle to remember what I had for dinner last night, let alone how I felt and how many hours of sleep I was getting in 7 years, sorry, 7 months ago. So I found that interesting that you could have some data about your life that could reveal to you something by the means of data analysis that you wouldn't find out otherwise.
Any
So
other way, yeah. You wouldn't know that information unless you actually took the pain to to write it down or to note it down somewhere. That's true. So what give me some examples. What are the kind of data points that you decided and how did you decide? Because I believe there's a million things you could capture about yourself. So how did you come down to what you are going to actually capture? What
yeah,
data?
so that person, they actually shared the template that they were using, and what they were tracking was just how they spent their time. So they would divide their day into 30-minute intervals, and you could label each 30-minute interval by one of the, I think, 16 categories. So there was sleep, entertainment, work, wasted time, social, traveling, exercise. There are a bunch of these labels because obviously you can't be writing the exact specific thing you're doing.
So we
You
kind
have
of
to kind of,
codify those different things into
yeah,
this.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So I had like a two-letter code for each of these categories, and I could I could just open the browser history, um, because I spent most of my time online, so it was easy to track what I was doing. So I could just open that, and I would do, SL for sleep or EN for entertainment, and I would just do it like that, basically track my entire day, or I suppose log it in that spreadsheet in a matter of a couple of minutes. And yeah.
Okay, at what point in the day do you track? So let's say you wake up at 8 in the morning. Do you capture the data for yesterday at that point, or how did you actually do it? Did you just do it on the fly as you went through your day, or was there a set time that you decided, okay, at this time I'm gonna go ahead and just log all the data for today?
No, I mean, I try to do it once per day, not more, because I feel like I could recall what I did throughout the day pretty well, so that I don't need to do it, maybe 4 times a day, because that will become annoying. If you want to do it consistently, you have to find a way to not make it annoying, right? If
Yes,
you decided to track every 5 minutes,
yeah,
then I mean, good luck,
yeah.
good luck. But this was the kind of segmentation in time, like the 30 minutes that I could recall at the end of the day. So I did it once per day. I mean, I tried at least. Sometimes, you forget about it, and then you have to log the past 2 or 3 days, which is a little more difficult. Introduces some inaccuracies, of course, but in the grand scheme of things, it was not a big deal.
Right, right. And so you did that for how long? For what? 7 months, 2 years? How
Uh, I had a full year for sure.
that you tried to do it consistently? Obviously, there was some few misses, but for the most part, almost every day you had to go in and log in all the. And how many data points did you have? How many specific dimensions did you have in your data set? Like, was it 10? Was it 30? How did you? I know you've described the different, like how you spend your time. But for instance, how many of those data points did you collect?
So in addition to time, I also tracked some other metrics like restfulness or how productive I felt, and together all of these combined. Um,
Did you track emotions? How you felt? Did you track your health? Did you feel healthy? Did you track if you were happy or sad or anything like that? Or was it just purely more time spent throughout the day?
I'd say the division was maybe around 50%. So maybe half of the metrics were related to time, the other half were related to, I guess you could call it mood, but it wasn't just mood, or, something like restfulness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I guess you could label that as mood, but it's not quite the same as, how happy you feel. I didn't have these words there necessarily, like how happy I felt on a particular day. Um,
But
I
you
mean,
had your
all of those are obviously subjective. So I guess I could have put it in there, yeah. But
so you try to keep it to things that are more or less quite objective that you could clearly measure, or you could tell somebody, hey, what is your mood? And the person could easily tell you, okay, I'm happy, or I feel like elated, or I feel depressed, or something like that, right?
yeah, I mean, I I thought about a way to try to make that as objective as possible, but there was no chance of doing that because all of those were subjective feelings. At the end of the
Yeah.
day, how rested do I feel? Um, that only I can tell really, and
Yeah.
there's no objective way. And
You can't really measure. Okay, it's a hard way to measure, but again, it's you. So you like I understand how I feel, but it's very difficult for somebody else to get it. That's why it's subjective because it really varies from person to person. It's very difficult to measure. There's no way to measure happiness per se. Somebody could say they are happy, even though to you they could look like they're not. It's kind of really um, subjective. Okay, so you capture all of this data over the course of a year. Then what do you do with it?
Well, that's where the programming stuff comes in. So I had
Okay,
all this data, but obviously having data is just one part of the puzzle. It's kind of useless if you don't do anything with it. You need to analyze it. And sure, you could create nice pie charts and bar charts out of it that show you, this is the number of hours on average that you were like, this is the number of hours of sleep that you were getting on average in, March or whatever. And you could see how that changed from month to month. You could do it on a weekly basis, but and it was nice to look at, but I just didn't feel like it told me much about me. So I wanted to uncover some relationships between the data as opposed to just plotting some static charts. And so that's when I looked up how to analyze data,
Ah,
how to derive some more meaningful relationships from it. And I saw that, okay, people are using Python for it. And, we had some basic tutorials online for how to do it. And so, yeah, I think I bought a course for how to analyze that. This one might have been on Udemy. It was something like time series forecasting
mhm.
with Python. And I don't think I finished it, to be honest. I don't know. At some point, I just didn't find it relevant enough to my kind of data because forecasting is usually for, well, not for this kind of data
Yeah, it's
that
cool.
I was
Figure
tracking.
out. Yeah,
And yeah, it's kind of went from there.
hmm. Interesting. So, what are some of the things that you learned about yourself from this data? Because I'm really intrigued. I'm thinking maybe that's something I need to do. I just don't know if I have the patience or the time. But so, what are some of the things you learned about yourself after analyzing your data for a year? And
Ooh,
first of all, was there anything that surprised you in your analysis, or was it like, oh yeah, I kind of know that, I kind of know this? Was there anything that stood out that you couldn't believe, or that was relatively like surprise you genuinely didn't know about yourself, but the data kind of threw that out at you, or was it like just normal stuff that you could figure on your own?
so this is one of the regrets that I have, which is that I didn't study this in depth enough. That I feel like I could have extracted more findings from this, and that I didn't kind of write them down somewhere where I could just reference it years later. So a lot of that is unfortunately pretty much lost at this point. It's mostly what I remember now. Yeah, I made some mistakes in regard to how I manage my files and data. So a lot of it is unfortunately gone.
Was it
So
not in a Google sheet or something? Like your Excel, where you capture the data, was it not in a Google sheet? You can't find that sheet, and even if you don't have the analysis, maybe the actual data itself. So you don't have like you've lost that data completely. There's no way to get it back.
I think I still do have the data somewhere, but I don't have the actual analysis of those of that data. So the relationship between X and Y. One thing I found out about myself, which was not too surprising, but it was funny to see in a chart and to show it someone else, is my sleeping schedule, because it's not really a schedule. I sleep, but when that happens, when I go to sleep, when I wake up, unless I actually have somewhere to go, I basically just kind of freestyle that thing. So
Right.
you could see my sleep shift very very easily. Where on one day I might wake up at 8 a.m. and go to sleep at, I don't know, let's say midnight. That next day I might wake up at 9 and go to sleep at 1. Then the next day I stay up longer for maybe 2 more hours, which kind of shifts when I wake up by 2 more hours. So I would cycle through basically the entire day over the course of a month, maybe.
What? Really? So
Yeah,
you
and
end
I
up waking up at like 10, then 11, then 12, then 1, and so you keep it keeps shifting like that.
yeah, you keep shitting throughout the entire day. So the worst parts were days when you wake up at like midnight, and then you don't have anything in the fridge, everything is closed. So that's the worst part of it. But it was also nice when you woke up at, like, let's say 8 p.m. and I would go to the gym, and they usually closed at 10. And like when you wake up at 8 a.m. and you want to go to the gym in the evening, you kind of feel tired, right? But if you wake up at 8 p.m., then going to the gym, that's basically, for you, it's morning. So
Yeah.
you're still full of energy and it's nice. And at that time, there were not many people there, which is always nice. So that was one thing. Then this was not very surprising, but it was nice to see it confirmed, was that how rested I felt correlated very highly with how productive I was, or with how productive I felt throughout the day. Interestingly, I don't think it had much impact on how stressed I feel throughout the day. And stress also didn't have much impact on how much work I got done.
So
So
how restful you felt correlated almost perfectly with how much work you got done. That is very interesting. So if
it
you
was
don't
more
know
about how productive I felt.
how
So
productive,
sleep.
okay, okay,
Hmm.
how productive that kind of correlated with your sleep or with how
Yeah,
much
because
you got?
I couldn't really track how productive I actually was, because for that you would need to define productivity, and that's
Right,
hard to do if you're working on different things.
right, right.
So I just needed to estimate that based on how productive I felt, regardless of what I was working on. And so yeah, that worked out pretty well with restfulness.
And did you have like a scale? So obviously for sleep you can measure your hours of sleep, but for instance, productivity. When you say so, if you feel really productive, what number do you assign versus non-productive? Was it like a binary thing, or you had like a scale that you netted for some of these dimensions? Like you gave it a number, right, on that specific
Yeah,
day.
yeah, yeah. It was a scale from 1 to 5,
On five,
exactly. How I define productive?
five is
Well,
really productive, and zero is like nah.
yeah. Well, it was 1 to 5, but exactly like you said, I'm just thinking about how I kind of label things as productive or not. So that you could think, okay, if I'm watching some educational video on YouTube, I mean, it's not exactly a waste of time because you're learning something new, but at the same time, it's maybe not relevant to what you should be doing. So it kind of is a waste of time. And yeah, I guess this was assessed or decided on a uh, like a case by case basis. So
Mhm.
yeah, but I try to be quite strict with it. So if I did something that was kind of pseudo productive, you're watching a documentary, I wouldn't put that as being productive. I just put it in wasted time or internet.
So if you're watching, if let's say if you're watching something like say, well, that's yeah, I see what you. So it's kind of it's really subjective because if I'm watching some a show on, let's say, astrophysics, for instance, versus watching a Netflix movie, I would consider the astrophysics show like productive because if I'm watching that show, it's for a very good reason. I mean, I like to watch stuff about space and stuff, but I usually am trying to. So instead of going to read books on astrophysics, if somebody does a documentary on say black holes or somebody does something dark matter, I much rather spend an hour watching that video. Like there's this guy on YouTube, he's Veritasium, or there's this other guy that does his name. The name of his channel is Everyday Astronaut, right? Just by watching that guy's video, I understand way more stuff about rockets and how they work versus me reading a book. So I think I get what you're saying. Depending on what you're actually watching, you could be learning something which you consider valuable to you as compared to something you're just watching for fun, say comedy, say a movie or something like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a very difficult assessment to make because if I if I take myself as an example and I work as a developer, watching astrophysics videos is useless to me. Now, is it more useful to me than watching Netflix? Absolutely, I think. But I feel like I'm gonna forget what I watched anyway. It's not gonna help me become a better developer. It's not gonna help me advance in my career. I might know more, I might understand more, but what does it contribute to other than how I feel about myself? Which again is not a trivial thing. I mean, if it makes you feel better about yourself, that you're spending your time watching documentaries as opposed to Netflix shows.
Yeah,
Congratulations. But there's also there's also an argument to be made that how how do you define a waste of time in a sense of, okay, so in terms of what you learn, watching a Netflix show is obviously much much lower than watching a documentary. However, in terms of how much it can entertain you, it's probably a lot higher.
way
And
higher.
sometimes is that entertainment that you're seeking, that you need in order to be more productive in other areas. And if I want to wind down, I'm not going to be watching a documentary because that partially feels like work because I have to be paying attention to what they're saying,
Exactly.
and I feel like I gotta get something out of this. Like I'm watching it for a reason. Right? I can't just be ignoring everything they're saying, and so it takes some of that mental bandwidth that I would rather just not use at all if I'm done with work. And so in that case, I would consider watching a Netflix show much more valuable because it's
Then
gonna help me, yeah, just
okay.
recharge better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it basically it's a function of what you're trying to accomplish. So So how then did you distinguish from how did you define time wasted versus entertainment? How did you make that distinction? What was entertainment and what was wasting time? If you could use an example, that'd be helpful.
So entertainment to me was something that I did by choice and that I actually felt had a
Fun.
positive positive impact on my mood in some way. So like wasted time is something that I felt like I slipped into when I just didn't want to work on something. And so you start watching random videos, you start scrolling on your phone. It just doesn't
Okay.
contribute to anything. But entertainment was a more conscious decision. Okay, I'm gonna wind down, not look at my phone, not look at anything. I'm just gonna sit down and watch a movie for 2 hours, and that's it. And so those 2 hours were labeled as entertainment. But
Mm,
if I knew that I had a hard task, coming up, or I just couldn't figure it out and I couldn't get myself to work on it, and then I looked at my browser history and I see that I'm opening a new video on YouTube every 5 minutes for 2 hours straight because I want to distract myself. That is to me a wasted time. So
okay. Okay, that makes sense. All right. So then you transition to, so how do you define yourself when it comes to development as a programmer, right? How do you define yourself? Because I know there's so many different languages. There's so many different like I want to say titles. First of all, do you call yourself any specific type of do you call yourself like a C plus expert or a Python expert, for instance? How do you define yourself in that space?
no, I definitely would not call myself an expert in anything because then I feel like any programmer who calls themselves an expert
An expert
is
is too
a
cocky. Like you can't do that in programming line. You can't say, "Hey, I'm a Python guru," for instance, or "I'm C guru." Well, C. By the way, isn't Python like a spin-off of C plus plus, or is it
no.
completely different?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat
Isn't
that?
Python Python is a programming language, right?
Yeah,
And I know it's different from C plus plus, but isn't it very similar? Like, wasn't Python kind of built on top of C?
it is possible, but I do not know the answer. I mean, it's
Okay.
it's very different from anything that starts with C, like C sharp, C plus plus, C. Very different purposes, but
All right. But let's say, so what is your lane? You specialize in Python. Would that be an accurate way to categorize you? If we were to characterize your programming skills, how would you characterize it?
so not anymore. That's what I started with. Later, I transitioned to different languages and frameworks, and now I just label myself as a developer because depending on the projects you work with, you might go really deep into a specific language, and then you might label yourself as a Python or JavaScript developer. But in my case, I currently work at a software development agency where the client comes to you with a problem that they want to solve, and your job is to find a solution. But oftentimes, those solutions cannot be done in
It
that one
involves
specific thing that you work
kind
on.
of cuts
So
across different.
yeah. So you basically search for, okay, how can this be done? And if you are reasonably hopeful that, okay, I found a way that this can be done, even if it's not a language or a framework that you worked with, you learn it. I mean, there's obviously limits to that. You can't just be picking up new languages every week because that's just
Right?
impossible to do well.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. So is there the idea of what do they call it? Is it zero code languages? So could you write a program without actually writing code? Is that possible?
Yeah, absolutely. You have a lot of these no code and low code tools where you just basically click a bunch of buttons and you can get a website up and running in a matter of minutes.
Like Wix. Do you know what Wix is? There was at some
Yeah,
point in
yeah,
time
that's one of the platforms. Yeah,
Wix is a platform. So that's what you're referring to. So you could basically create your website without writing code, even though that the Wix platform is actually running on some type of code.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Hmm. So I guess it depends on at what level on the stack you're trying to create. So people have created like these platforms, the likes of Wix, to enable people create websites without having to write code. But that's just a use case for websites. So is it true that you could basically do anything without, or are there specific like verticals that you could do? You could solve specific. There's a specific problem set that you can solve with low to no code languages, but you couldn't do that for everything, right?
Yeah, that's right. There's certain things you can do with no code or low code tools, but it's a subset of programming and development, which means you cannot do everything with it. Certainly, if you try to do something like Facebook, I mean, good luck without code. Good luck to you. So there's limits to it, but it is growing quite fast. And a couple of years back, it might have been possible to do some very simple informational websites. I mean, just those kinds of websites. And in the last few years, we had a bunch of these new platforms and tools come to the market that allow you to build much more complex things that you could easily mistaken for having been written in code.
Wow. So give me an example. What's an example of something that is highly complex that you could do with it really? And when you say low code, are you referring to like SQL or you're referring to like actual code, but that is basic?
Yeah, I'm referring to actual code that is basic.
Okay.
So not SQL. Low code would mean that it's a platform that might be similar to Wix, but you do write a little bit of basic code because sometimes that can really get you really far. Even if you can write just a few lines of code, that can sometimes have a very significant advantage over writing no code. So that's what I mean. But in basically any platform, even in Wix, you can still write code if you want. So technically, you could call that a low code tool, but I just kind of bunched them together in one group. So an example of something relatively complex that you can do right now with these no code tools, you could do a two-sided marketplace for rental properties, for example. So you could be an owner of a property, an apartment or a house or anything. You could sign up, you could put it up there, put photos in there with a price and anything, just all the standard information you get about properties. And then you could also sign up as a user. You could scroll through these properties, fill out your profile, message the owners of these properties, schedule visits with them, virtual tours or in-person tours.
So it's like your
Um,
own mini Zillow in some ways.
yeah, something like that.
Oh.
That's an example of something that is much more complex than just a landing page for a website, sorry, for a restaurant,
Mhm.
where we just display some basic menu and a button, call us.
There's-
That's a much more complex example, and it's something you can do. I wouldn't say quite easily now, but
So
you
how long
can.
would it take you if you had to do something like the apartment thing, if you wanted to create a small website to host your buildings? Let's say you have an apartment building and you wanted to use that as your platform for your property management, where maybe your tenants, if they have like a service request, they could use that. If there's an issue on the property, they could message the property manager. If you want to do something like that for someone like you, how long will that take you? Minutes, hours, days, weeks? Probably
Weeks, weeks, definitely weeks.
take you week. With low to no code, it will take you weeks.
Yeah, I think so. I think so because it's quite complex and you have to get a lot of the moving parts right. Just because it's possible to do in no code or low code doesn't mean that it's easy,
Mm.
especially because these tools are quite new, which means that although you can build those things in them, sometimes you have to do these awkward workarounds and you're not going to find a whole lot of documentation on how to do X, Y, and Z. You have to figure a lot of stuff yourself. So it can take a bit of time. Of course, it depends on how sophisticated you want it. Do I, send emails to people um, when they're not online and someone messages them? Like, do I send them an email? Hey, someone sent you a message. You should go and check it out. It's a simple feature, right? And you take it for granted in in existing platforms that you use, but it's not just a matter of clicking one button in your platform that says, "Hey, yes, I want to do this." You actually have to implement that feature, and again, you can make it as complex as you want, but it is going to take some time. And so that's just one example. You have a lot of these features available, so those accumulate to quite a long time frame.
Wow. Okay. Okay. That's interesting. Because I have some ideas of certain things I want to do, and I'm not an expert in you know I don't write code. I mean, well, you know what? To be fair, when I was in engineering school, I did write some code. I think I wrote the code to do. Remember the pipe? Wait, no, the the solution to quadratic equations. The a squared plus b squared
Hmm.
square root of, yeah. So I think I remember writing, it was such a long time ago. So I wrote a program to solve that problem where you just kind of put in your x, the value of x, and then you hit enter, and then it
Hmm.
kind of solves
Yeah.
it. That was the extent of my of my coding experience. That was a long time ago. So I'm not an expert at writing code by a long shot, but if 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 I if I had something like that to do, wouldn't it just be easier for me to just go like on Fiverr and just find somebody to have them do it? You know. And by the way, are you providing services by, or you're working with an agency, or do you actually have, do you put yourself out on the marketplace? Do you have your own clients, or do you just like work for an agency?
I used to do that a little bit, but not anymore. So I work at that agency part time, and I spend the rest of my time working on my own projects. So I don't do that anymore. So to what you said about, can I just go to Fiverr, find someone to do it for cheap? You could, and I think that can work, but just just as it is with any somewhat more sophisticated service, you run a I think you run
Like,
a high
and
risk of just getting someone who gives you something that might seem to work and look good at a first glance, but then once you actually start using it,
you
and
run into all kinds of issues.
yeah, you run into all kinds of issues. Exactly. So it's possible, but it takes a while, I think, to find the kind of people that you can rely on. In which case, they're probably not going to be that cheap, but definitely cheaper than if you wanted to pay some external agency to code it from scratch without any of these tools.
So what is this video subscription thing you're working on? Is that your personal project, or is that something you're doing with the agency?
But
The
that's one of my personal projects.
Okay. And so let me ask you this. Could you walk us through a couple of projects that you've worked on that you think are really, really important that people need to know about? It could be something that you're doing personally, or it could be something that you did for the agency or for a client. So if you could paint the picture, and you know, I mean, I'm a little bit techy, but I don't write code. But if you want to use like a language that is really easy for people to understand, don't use too technical language. But if you could walk us through like an example of a project that you did, and what I mean by that is, let's say if you, like for instance, the video production thing, what's the idea behind it? Is the intent to help people create short clips for things like YouTube Shorts, TikTok? What's the idea behind that project?
Exactly like you said. So, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't have some. I'm thinking of how do you say this in English? I don't have some very sophisticated ideas behind. I want to achieve. No, I'm still trying to think of that word in the back of my head in English, but I just can't.
So what's the word in? How do you call your language your primary language? Is it
Slovak. I don't know. I feel like I speak slightly better English than my than my um, native tongue, so that's even more difficult. Noble. That's the word I was looking for.
Oh,
So I don't have any noble goals with any of these projects. Honestly, the goal is just to make money.
okay.
That's that's it. Now, that is not mutually exclusive with helping people. Uh,
Yeah.
Oftentimes, those go hand in hand. And the idea behind that video production subscription service is exactly what you said. That you might have these. I do it for tech companies.
Okay.
Oftentimes, they record webinars on, this is how you, maybe this is how you use our platform, or these are the features that we offer, and they do this detailed, 60-minute walkthrough. Other times, they might
So
host events.
like screen recording, like like we could be on a Zoom call and then we'll go on the website and then you explain how you do X, Y, and Z. You go through all the different features of the platform and then you take that recording and then you parse it out into short clips that you could use for things like training of employees or onboarding. Is that like kind of what the intent is?
So you got parts of it right, but the purpose of that is not to share it internally, but to share it externally. Like you mentioned in the beginning, you might post it to TikTok, to Shorts, to Instagram Reels. So that was one type of content. These kinds of webinars
Mm-hmm.
that are often aimed at the public audience, not their own employees. The second type of content are, let's say, videos that they record at events. A lot of these companies host events where they, release the second version of their product or something major. And so all of that is recorded and they have these panel discussions and interesting conversations. So that's the second type of content.
Mm-hmm.
And the third one is, well, also video podcasts that a lot of
Like the
these,
one we're doing right now.
exactly. So there's a lot of these tech company leaders that have these kind of podcasts and record interesting conversations. And a lot of them tend to post the full videos online, which is great. I mean, that's the first step, but not many of them, I suppose, take advantage of that content to make sure that it reaches a wider audience. And so the goal there is to focus on these companies, or more specifically on marketing managers or marketing teams in B2B tech companies, and help them get more out of their long form videos.
Hmm. Interesting. Wow. So let's say let's use this recording for instance. So let's say we have a 2 hour, 3 hour conversation and then we have that recording. So what does your platform do? I take the recording, I upload it to, is it a website? Is it an application? What, how does it work?
Yeah, so it's a cloud space. You upload the recording there, and then you can decide to basically leave that up to us, or you can give us further directions on, there's this specific part of the conversation, between, you could say, I don't know, halfway through the conversation, there's this interesting part where we talk about this topic, and that's something I want to create these clips out of, in addition to other things. But I want to make sure that that is there. Um, so you could give us instructions in regard to what kind of content is created from that, and then we we do exactly that. We produce short clips.
And so do you enhance the short clips with like text or inserts? Do you do all that? And do you create like, you know how when you go to YouTube, sometimes you have these videos and then in the description you have the timestamps of different spots in the video if you want to skip to those. Does your platform do something like that?
Yeah, so those timestamps are only for long form videos. They don't exist for like
Oh
shorts.
yeah, yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, but you were right in the beginning that one of the things we had is subtitles. We might enhance the audio, maybe some motion graphics, some cutouts, maybe some transitions, sound effects, basically things to make it a little more engaging than it is by default.
Okay, okay. And is that something that somebody has to actually do? So do you do this yourself, or do you have some type of workflow capability built into your platform to where it takes the video and then you just give it baseline instruction on how it needs to split it? Or is there somebody in the background actually editing the video and cutting it up, or is that done by the system, or is it a mixture of both?
So it is a mixture of different tools, but it is primarily me and one other person that I'm working on this with. And when I say mixture of tools, is that there's tools that can do a pretty good job of, for example, enhancing audio for you. You don't have to tweak with a million different filters and noise gate and compression and equalization, all of those things. You could if you wanted to, but there's also ways to make that easier. So we use tools where they help save time and do a better job than we could in that time frame. But we are significantly involved in that. I mean, you do have tools like you can find existing platforms where you upload a video and they spit out a bunch of these short clips,
Exactly. Yeah.
and that can get you there to some extent. But the biggest problem there is that the content of those clips oftentimes doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It is much more likely to make sense if the content uh,
So there's
to
no
to be
coherence in the ones that are just done automatically. So you need like a human touch to it to make it make sense. That's what you're saying.
yeah, exactly. So those platforms give you a better output, as in they give you clips that make more sense when the video you submit there is already easy to understand, like a conversation about food or something simple like that. I mean, fair enough, you could have very complex conversations about food, but as soon as you give it some technical content where you have a lot of these very specific terms that the regular person probably wouldn't understand, you have a million of these acronyms and abbreviations. These tools often struggle to create clips that make sense from beginning to end, especially when you extract them out of a long form video. You have 30 to 60 seconds to get a point across, and you got to make sure that you manage to do that over the course of that entire clip. You cannot just start in the middle of a sentence or in the middle of some topic and then finish the same way, because maybe it sounds good, maybe it looks good, but it makes no sense, and no one's going to be watching that. So so that's where the human touch is most necessary right now.
And so it sounds as though you've really bucketed out your market. So you named it three kinds of video. You have the and it sounds as though your primary go-to-market customers are like corporate entities, like businesses, tech companies. That's kind of like
Yeah,
what your primary
yeah,
target.
exactly.
Okay. And so, and you have three, like you've defined three video categories. So you have like corporate event videos, you have podcast type videos like this, and then you have instructional videos, so to speak, all intended for public consumption, right?
Exactly, yes. So I'm dialing down a little on that third type, on those instructional videos, because that is oftentimes nearly impossible to repurpose into short clips, because these are often recorded in landscape mode. The person is sharing their screen. Maybe their face cam is in one of the corners of the video. I mean, it's tiny. You have to like really zoom in, which degrades the quality a lot. But more importantly, you cannot just take a landscape format and turn that into a portrait format for these short clips, where the main content on the screen is a person sharing their screen. It's not a person's face that is the predominant part of that screen. It's whatever they're doing on their screen, and that's just impossible to fit into those short clips in a way that makes sense. So it's best when someone's face, be it one or multiple, is the main part of that video.
So meaning that what you're calling now sounds like a problem, but it also sounds like an opportunity to build something. I can imagine an engine where you load like a landscape type video and then it kind of converts it to I don't know, portrait format video, then that you can then put now into your actual application system to parse it out. I don't know, just thinking of the top. That could be something that you'd be able to fix, right? Like transform the actual video file from landscape to portrait. Is that even possible? I think it might be.
Yeah, I mean, there's platforms that already do it. I mean, it's possible with any video. The question is, does the conversion result in something that makes sense? So you might have a landscape video where on the left side, you might have one person talking. On the right side, you might have a different person talking. If you want to turn that into a portrait
Ooh,
mode,
now they're sideways.
that's very easy. No, no, no. They don't have to be sideways. Now, what you can do is very simple. So, as we said, we have a landscape mode. one person on the left, the other person on the right. If you want to turn that into a portrait mode, you put one person on the top, the other person in the bottom, like in the first, upper half and lower half. That is very easy to do.
Okay.
And there's a bunch of these different kind of formats where you can do the same with 3, 4 people. You just find different ways to arrange that. But when someone is sharing their screen, like maybe their browser or their app, and they're clicking through it, how do you turn that into portrait mode? Because it would just be way too kind of jumpy, too incoherent for anyone to get something out of it. Because
But yeah, if they're scrolling up and down and you wanted to do something like that, it's gonna be like they're scrolling side to side. It's gonna be
yeah,
really,
yeah, yeah. And that is going to be very difficult to follow oftentimes.
I see the challenge. I see the challenge. So maybe to solve for that, you might want to solve for that at the actual capture. So how you capture the video kind of sort of matters, especially for the explainer ones, like you just described. How you actually record it in the first place could make a difference as to whether you can even use it to do anything else, right? And maybe the flow as well. So if you're walking somebody through how you go, let's say how you create a user or how you create an account on the platform. However long that takes, that's how long it takes. If it takes over 60 seconds, you can't just cut it up like that. So I think I get what you're saying. So there are some challenges with working with explainer videos, right? Some really peculiar challenges that are unique to that. Okay, okay. And
Yeah.
so do you have like any other interesting projects that you're working on outside of this video? And by the way, just paint the picture for the audience, right? So let's say you have you're a content creator and you create long format content, right? And somebody would like to use your service. What do they do?
They go to my website and they click on the contact page and schedule a quick call with me. So as simple as that. Yeah, some other project that I'm working on right now is also related to shorts, and it is an automatically generated AI short based on a sentence. So you give it a prompt. You say create a short about, I don't know, the benefits of exercise or whatever, and then it just spits out a nice short that is maybe 40, anywhere between 30 to 60 seconds long, and
Mhm.
it has a good script. It has an AI voiceover, AI generated images, transitions, subtitles, basically everything you would want from an engaging piece of short form content.
And do you get to pick the look and feel of your character in that short video? You could want it to be a man or a woman or some. Do you and you can do all that within the prompt. You just prompt the video how you want it, and then it just comes out, and then you can use it. So you can publish it, on YouTube or wherever.
Yeah, so right now I'm not really focusing on the customizability of that project. That's one of the features that would come later. Right now, this is still work in progress. I'm nearly done. I'm just waiting for one platform to kind of go through with one of my requests. It's a boring and technical thing, but I'm basically just waiting for some approvals here and there. And then once I have some first version of that, your MVP, once I have that done and it starts to get some traction, then I might start to think about adding in a bunch of these features that allow you to maybe customize or choose the voice that you want to use or the images or something else.
ChatGPT published, the OpenAI published Sora, the video generating platform. Is that kind of what you're trying to do, or is it something completely different?
It's something quite different. Yeah.
Is it a GPT? So, I guess I just have to. So, does your project have any? Because I think it was late last year, early this year. They did like an event where they launched GPT. I don't know what if you know what that is. Those are like when I say mini AIs that are specialized to do specific things. You have kind of like bots, right? So a GPT, you can have a GPT that writes emails, for instance, or you can have a GPT that will go online and
Yeah. I know what you mean. I created a few.
oh, you did too. Okay, okay. So I was wondering if that's what you were describing when you were talking about the video creation platform or bot. Uh, okay, that's interesting. So, I have some ideas about certain things I would like to get done, and it's not that I procrastinate. Maybe I'm an overthinker, or I want to get all the answers before I make a move. But because I and part of the reason I'm struggling with this is because the work I do, right? So we configure ERP systems in order to so on the financial infrastructure, FI structure of your ERP system. That's what we do. And I've worked in this field for a while, and every global business, the way my view on it now is like a giant stack. So you have different things that you have to worry about. You have to worry about not just because a lot of people just go to Amazon, they just see the front end of the app. There's a lot of logistics that go on behind transportation, I don't know, picking, sorting. You have to manage a lot of things, and then you have to manage relationship with different providers. Because I have this idea where you could, I don't know, so you're in Slovenia, right? You're in Europe. So you could go on something like Alibaba. I assume you have Amazon in Europe as well. You have Amazon, right?
Yeah, it just takes forever to get here.
Oh, it takes, well, we have Prime. It gets here like in 2 days. But so platforms, there's this platform like a few years ago, I used to go to this platform. It's called Wish. It's kind of like a knockoff version of Alibaba. Do you know what Wish is?
Yeah, of course.
So I was thinking of doing something like that. But then once I started looking into it, I realized that all I was thinking about was just creating a website. I didn't realize that you had to worry about all this other stuff that has to happen in the real world, from your warehouses to your transportation management to your distribution. And so when I think about that stack, so where do you fall? Do you just whenever you're working on this project, do you tend to lean towards projects that are all like that you can enable just with software? You stay away from things that require like some type of physical presence, be it having needing people to ship a product, you have to go to the post office. You just kind of stay in the software space, so to speak. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I avoid the hardware stuff because I don't know hardware. I know software, right? I've built a bunch of different projects, so that's the way for me to go.
I see.
Yeah,
And I
but
think that's a problem with my project because you could build a website any day. However, if you're gonna build a website, let's say if you decided that you wanted to build a website where you're selling, let's say you're making cups like this, right? You're making little cups with decorations, and you have different types you put on a website. It's different. It's very different from a website where you have a whole bunch of vendors that are selling cups like this that are in different places at the same time. So I think that's what the the problem with my so-called project is. Okay. So what is your view on what's going on in Europe now? I actually have a couple. I have a lot of family in Europe actually. So I have cousins in France, Germany, Belgium. Have you been to those countries before?
well, I studied in Antwerp, Belgium, for a couple of months. That's where I was in college.
So do you speak
So
French or
no,
no? No, no French. So you spoke
no,
English when you were there. I believe in Belgium they speak French, don't they? They do speak French, right?
they speak French. They also speak Dutch, depending on which part of Belgium you're in.
And how many languages do you speak? Do you speak like four languages or just two, English and
Well, it depends on who you ask, but I'd say I speak two. I mean, my native language and also English. The third one, it's a question of whether that counts as a third language, but it's Czech. But the reason that's a question mark is because anyone born in Slovakia is going to understand and be able to speak Czech, and vice versa. Well, Czechs are much better at speaking Slovak than the other way around. But it's a separate language. I speak it, I understand it, so I guess we can
so
count
you
it.
don't think of it as a really useful language outside of that country in a way, right? Because I originally I'm from Cameroon. In Cameroon, like it's probably similar to your situation. So I the baseline for everybody in my country is at least 3 to 4 languages because just like Canada, we have French and English. Everybody speaks French and English at different degrees. You know, some people are more versed in one versus the other, but most people kind of understand both. And then also there's also a local language called Pidgin, like a mixture of English and dialect. It's weird, but sometimes when I speak it, you pick up some English words here and there.
Hmm.
And then when I moved to the US a long time ago, I ended up working with a lot of, and I didn't realize that the second most spoken language in the US is Spanish. Most people don't realize that a lot of people speak Spanish here.
Yeah, especially in
So
the South, I'm assuming.
oh yeah, absolutely. So there's Spanish speaking Americans all over the place. So I ended up having to kind of sort of speak some Spanish, and then just a little bit of as you probably know, if you understand French and Spanish, then Italian and Portuguese is right around the corner. Like those languages are so similar. Like there's literally words like something like let's say something like love, right? In French it's amour, in Spanish it's amor, in Portuguese it's amor, and in Italiano it's the same. Now the way they do the old kind of changes from language to language, but it's quite literally is the same word. And that's 4 languages. So if you understand one language, it's almost as if you could move that over to your understanding of French. You can take that to English. You can take that to Spanish and Italian and Portuguese. So that's
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's also the same case with Slavic languages. So
exactly.
I do not, speak other Slavic languages per se, but I can pick up a lot from Russian, Ukrainian, Polish, Serbian, Croatian, Bulgarian.
Oh wow. So if those people speak, even if you don't fully understand, you kind of sort of know what they are saying. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, depending on the language, because some are more similar than others, but basically, you could you could figure out a way how to communicate with these people to get a simple point across. Maybe with some gestures and the things, but you can communicate. So it's always nice going for vacations to these countries because you're in a restaurant and like you even know how to. You may not understand what you're saying, but like if there's something on a menu, you know how to read it. You know how to pronounce it in the kind of Slavic
Okay.
accent,
Yeah.
and so yeah.
Oh, that's funny. So yeah, let me ask you about it. So I've never been to Europe. Not well, to be fair, when I was flying, so when you're flying out of Africa, there's usually no direct flight to America. You usually have to stop, like it's usually coming from Cameroon. You have to stop in Belgium, and then if you're going to Canada, you hop on Air Canada. If you're going to the US, you hop on United. So let's just say I've been to Europe, but I've been in Europe, but I've not been to Europe, if that makes sense. So I've transitioned through Europe. So I've never really spent time there. So my understanding of European culture is very, very minimal. I have no idea what's going on over there. What's the situation with the war going on in Europe right now, and how does that impact you, if at all it impacts you? How is the inflation there? How is life over there right now?
I can't speak much about the war because I'm just not, I suppose, educated enough on it. I mean, I do have my own opinions, um, but yeah, those are just opinions. I mean, I was born in a my hometown is maybe 60 kilometers, which might be like I don't know 45 miles away from the border with Ukraine. So I've been to Kiev a bunch of times before, and I have a bunch of Ukrainian friends, also a bunch of Russian friends. So I do have, I guess, I don't want to say a relationship with the country, but I'm not entirely distant from it. So I guess I do pay a little more attention to what's happening than than people who live in other
Yeah.
parts of the world. But so far, it hasn't really impacted me in any way. I mean, I now live in the capital of Slovakia, which is on the opposite end of the country. So yeah, life is, well, I was gonna say life is good, and it kind of is, but the prices are not so great. I mean, you think a Central European country that someone can mistake for an Eastern European country, which are kind of notorious for being cheap in lots of ways. Not quite cheap here, especially food and rent. That has been going quite insane. So
Oh,
I yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've had friends who they traveled to Thailand and um, Saudi Arabia and Emirates and all of these different countries in Asia. And to an extent, maybe it's unfair to be comparing Europe with Asia in terms of prices because on average, almost everything there is going to be cheaper. But they said like you can move to one of these places that seem to be very expensive on the outside, but the prices there are going to be the same or very similar to the prices you're already paying in Slovakia. Um, so that's either the case of this country being very expensive or the other countries not being as expensive. So yeah, you can't really rely on takeout every second day. You gotta cook a little more often than you would hope for.
you have to pick some more. So there's a we have a tradition on the show. Usually every guest I get leaves a question for the next guest, and then I have a set of questions that I like to ask, and then I have one question that I have for my wife because she and it's funny because in this case you were so young that I'm not sure how to put this question to you because the question from my wife is what would you tell your younger self? So let's say if you could go 4, 5, 6 years back and looking at where you are today, right? What would you tell yourself, your past self? What advice would you give your past self to help prepare yourself for today, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. I was also actually thinking about this recently, and I was struggling to come up with a good answer, which I found a bit concerning. In terms of my own reflection, but because one part of me wants to say that I wouldn't change anything because I kind of like the trajectory that I'm on, and I'm satisfied with how a lot of things are going in my life. I feel like it's heading in the right direction.
Mhm.
So, to an extent, I feel like I wouldn't change much. Um, but something I would, oh yeah, maybe one thing is I would try to make sure that I don't lose a lot of the audacity that I used to have, which again we need to we need to go into some stories about what exactly that means. But I used to be surrounded by people who were very kind of ambitious and audacious and did things that for their age were not very common, and they kind of helped me do it with them. And so we did a bunch of interesting stuff that was unusual for our age, and I feel like that helped to propel me, further
Right.
than where I should have been at that point. But then you kind of part ways. People go off to college, they go to different jobs. You kind of lose touch with them, and sometimes there's these traits that you think are yours that are in fact just something that you were doing uh, as a consequence of being in the presence of other people who have those traits and a strong influence on you. And oftentimes that is being spoken about in a negative way, like don't be influenced by people's trades, like get away from people who I don't
Yeah,
know,
it
just
could go either
cause you to
way.
be. Yeah, but it can be the other way around too. They can
Right,
have a very
exactly.
positive impact, and it's hard to realize until much later. So to probably do that.
Okay, okay. And the next question will be I have a zero of 4, 5 questions here that so okay, this one also came from a previous guest, but I like to ask you this. Why? So this is the question from one of the previous guests, right? His question to you, he didn't know, my guests don't know each other. They just, you come in on the show
Hmm.
and then talking. So the question is, why can't we just get along? Why is it that we as humans on this planet have so much contention? Why can't we just get along? In your own mind, in your own view of the world, why do you think we can get along? Or do you think we do get along as a people, as humans on the planet altogether?
I feel like I'm out of my depth here
I know it's a bit esoteric and philosophical, but that's how I like to. Because I'm really curious. I like to just get to see the world through different people's eyes, so to speak. I think that's a great way to explore differences. And I just want to know. And the question is not even from me, but it's a great question. I like the question. I have a whole bunch of questions. Now I keep the ones that I find the most interesting to ask to everybody else. So yeah,
Yeah, no,
quite.
I do agree. It's an interesting question. I don't even feel like I have an answer. I
And it's okay if you don't know, because quite honestly, personally, I don't know. Because I told him that if you ask me that question, I truly, to be honest, I really couldn't tell you. I could come up with some ideas, but I really don't know why. I just don't know. So it's one of those things that nobody nobody really knows. And the next question then I have for you, and this is the one from the guest, quite literally the last person I spoke to. His question is very interesting. He asked a question: do you know what septemic is? That's the question of my previous guest. The word I
can you repeat the word?
Yeah, I just put it in the chat so you can see it. Because I figured
Systemics.
when I said the word, you probably wouldn't even know what the heck I'm talking about. I didn't know what that was, and I just spoke to him, and it's interesting. So yeah, the question is what. And if you don't know the answer today, that's fine. You can look it up or something. But that was his question. What systemic is?
Yeah, I do not know, as you can probably tell.
So that makes two of us. Okay, now the last one I have is more of a ranking. So I'm gonna give you four things, right? And then what I want you to do is rank them from top to bottom. What you think would be the most important, and
Uh-huh.
what would be the least important. So the first one is robo taxis. The second one is energy. The third one is humanoid robots. The fourth one is medicine. So, of these four things, what do you think is going to have the greatest impact on humanity over the next, say, 25 to 50 years? What is it that in the next 25 years, say, right, that we're going to be like, wow, this has really changed the face of the world? We have robo taxis, like Tesla is planning to do the robo taxis. Tesla is also planning to do humanoid robots. We have energy. It could be solar energy. It could be I don't know, fusion,
Yeah,
nuclear,
yeah.
and then we have medicine in general. So maybe I could just add IT, because I mean, and part of the reason I don't like using AI, putting AI in this, is because I feel like AI has cuts across everything. You could apply it to almost every industry, right? Just kind of like energy, but it's a little bit, it's like it sits on top of energy, obviously with the NVIDIA chips that are crazy consumers of energy. So, in your view, what of these things is going to be the most impactful in our future?
Number one, energy. Number two, medicine. Number three, humanoid robots. Number four, robotaxis.
Oh, that's very interesting. So, your number one is, so a lot of people do energy number one. And why is that? So, when you say energy, are you thinking just regular I don't know, hydropower, or you're thinking solar energy or something else?
It's interesting. I actually thought about energy in the context of computational energy that you often need to run basically anything related to IT. I mean, that compute there is really, I wouldn't say constrained, maybe yet, but it might be. Um, but I also thought about it in terms of nuclear energy, for example.
Okay.
Very very contentious topic, but uh, something something that we actually have in Slovakia too. So I have a little more vested interest in it, let's say, than average. But so yeah, energy, because that is to me gonna probably be the focal point of a lot of conversations that countries are gonna have on a diplomatic level, and how the relationships between countries might develop, which then is probably gonna trickle down into different into basically everything else in any particular country or society.
That's
Because
true.
obviously, when you deal with climate change and everything surrounding energy and temperature, things can get very very interesting. So I just think everything related to it, be it the actual energy you use in your home or the energy you use for
The power,
computations.
IT. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, yeah.
And the last question for you today will be, what makes us human? In your opinion, what makes us human?
What makes us human? I'm trying to think of could you create uh, something that is not a human that would be indistinguishable from a human.
Right.
And if you could, then I would have no answer to that question. And I do think you could create a piece of synthetic technology that would be indistinguishable from a human, perhaps not too many years or decades from now. So I don't think I don't think there's anything that makes us indistinguishably human.
Hmm.
Maybe we'll find out at some later point.
Well,
Once we have something sort of similar to compare it to in terms of the cognitive power. But I mean, I guess you could say consciousness, right? When you compare it to, I don't know,
yeah, that's the
rocks.
one I usually get. I usually get the soul or consciousness. And so I've had a couple of people tell me, I really don't know, because with AI now, they can do anything. It used to be art, it used to be music, but now, like AI does a whole lot of that. So yeah, it's a tough one. And some of these questions I don't ask because I know the answer to. I'm curious myself. I really don't know. I think about them most of the time. But Eric, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for taking the time. Uh, hopefully we can do another one. But I really appreciate you taking your time, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. Hopefully it wasn't too boring from your perspective. And I will leave the link to in the description of this video is gonna be a link to your website. And do you want to tell the people how to get in contact with you? Do you have social media, website? People want to reach out to you. How do they go about doing that?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I like the fact that we touched on a bunch of different topics because I spend most of my time in tech, and sometimes I just get a headache constantly thinking about it. So it's always nice to diverge a
Great.
little from it and touch on some other topics
Yeah.
with people other than just my friends and get perspectives from people like you. So thank you for that. I am basically on all socials, but if I spell out my name, I can guarantee you're not going to be able to write it. If I spell it, then yes. If I pronounce it, then no,
Oh yeah. Okay.
because it's a Slavic and a very long name. So I think leaving that link is probably going to be the most reliable way to do that.
Okay, okay, and I believe that I have the link from the platform how I found you. So I'll leave the description to that in the I'll leave the link to the in the descriptions below, and you can reach out to Eric quite personally. And I'm gonna say this right now. I'm probably gonna reach out to you because of this podcast project that I'm developing right now, and hopefully we can develop a good working relationship and get some good work done together. So thank you very much for joining. I appreciate it. I know it's super late. I'm so sorry I kept you up late at night.
No,
Hopefully.
it's all good. I think it was my suggestion
Oh
to
yeah,
schedule
yeah,
it for
that's
this
right.
time.
That's
So don't
right.
blame yourself. This is all on me, but it's fine. Like I mentioned at the beginning, my sleeping schedule is not a schedule. So this might as well be a morning to me.
Yeah. Okay, man. Good luck on all your projects, and I'll be reaching out. And if you want to reach out to Eric, please, the link to his website is in the description below. I'm also gonna try to add links to his social medias as well. Reach out to Eric with any comments, questions, or concerns around, if you're doing videos, you want to create short form content for different platforms. I strongly encourage you to reach out to him. Thank you very much, Eric.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks,
Have a
man.
good night, man.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, bye bye.